Welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts, with hosts Margaret Pickoff, Tom Butzler, and Tim Abbey.
Hello, and welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast from Penn State Extension for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts. I'm one of your hosts, Margaret Pickoff. I'm a horticulture educator with Penn State Extension, and on each episode, I'm joined by my colleagues on the green industry team as co-hosts. On today's episode, my co-hosts are Tim Abbey and Tom Butzler. Welcome, Tim and Tom.
Hello,
Hey,
Margaret.
Nice to see you guys. On today's episode, we'll be joined by Wendy Leuenberger, who's a graduate student at Michigan State University. But before we get to our interview with Wendy, we like to start out with a little check-in about what we, your hosts, are seeing or doing or thinking about at this time of year. And as of this recording, it is late August. So maybe I'll start with Tom. What's going on in your neck of the woods in central PA?
I guess probably two comments. One, at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the growing season, it was wet. I mean, it was wet. And then it just weather gets kind of goofy and things shut off. And now it's getting really dry out here. And we've talked about this in the past that, I think we're going to start seeing some long-term impacts on our trees and shrubs out there with these just wide variations in moisture, sometimes too much moisture and sometimes just long periods of no moisture. And I think we're going to start seeing some issues with some of the woody ornamentals out in the landscape. The other thing of note is I have some shrubby dogwoods around the house, and pretty much every year the one of them near the driveway gets completely defoliated, and I just kind of watch it. It's always kind of neat. I have the dogwood sawfly, the larvae. They're kind of white, fuzzy, and they just kind of do their thing, and I just watch as the days go by. I get fewer and fewer leaves on it, and you just lift with a midrib. So as of right now, my shrubby dogwood is just like a twiggy dogwood. There's no leaves on it, so I kind of let them do their thing. I don't really pay too much attention to it. It's not a focal point in the landscape, so it's kind of interesting.
They come back each spring though?
Yeah, I mean
Okay.
the defoliate. Oh, the dogwood sawfly.
Well,
Yeah,
the dogwoods themselves, like they're holding up okay even with the
yeah.
defoliation.
The defoliation completely was what, last week or maybe about 10 days. So, they've kind of done what they needed to do. There was enough photosynthesis occurred over the past couple months, so it's not really putting a lot of stress on it. And they're not out in the open, so it's not like they're receiving a lot of heat and stressful factors. So, yeah, they seem to limp along all right. I can't do anything with the shrubby dogwood. It was given to me from my daughter when she was in kindergarten, so that was, I don't know, what is it, going on 20 some years, so it's kind of yeah, it's got some sentimental value, so
Oh, that's
can't rip it
very
out.
sweet. Nice. Yeah, Tim, what are you seeing out there?
Well, I'll echo what Tom said. It's probably the last month. I'm in South Central Pennsylvania, and we haven't had much rain compared to, like that first half or more of the summer was ridiculous. And did a pest walk yesterday for a program, and the one thing that I brought along a sample of was fall webworm, which typically I see a lot of that here. I mean, it's a common native insect pest, and I think that's the sample I brought was the first one that I have actually seen, and it's kind of unusual. I don't know what is going on as far as like that decrease in population. Maybe there's more cyclical, and I just hadn't paid enough attention. I haven't had anybody call me with anything like unique as far as like other problems. Though the one other thing that's we may have mentioned in previous podcasts is in this area where I am, we're on more of an uptick with spotted lanternfly this year.
Mm.
The last two summers, they've actually been really minimal. But I was collecting samples today for a program tomorrow, and I went to just one tree of heaven, and it was very easy to snag all more than I really needed to take. So kind of unusual, at least for my area, because I've only had it in my house, like where I am, for about 5 years.
Mm. I've only seen one in Philly so far,
Oh, wow.
this summer at least. So they're definitely not very present, at least in my part of the city. And maybe not up in Bucks County either. But so we'll see. I mean, we were hit really, really hard a couple years ago where it was just like you couldn't walk without just being pelted by them. So yeah, we're similarly having like a really long dry stretch. One interesting question that I've gotten a couple times this summer that I've never gotten before is about dodder, the parasitic plant, which is really wild. Have you guys seen that in person?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
now I see it all the time. And I think it's kind of I'm learning more about it. It has specific plant hosts and it doesn't photosynthesize at all and just kind
right.
of like wraps it's like usually a yellowy orange stringy thing and just kind of pops up places and there is an invasive species, a Japanese species, but apparently there's a bunch of native species as well. And
Oh,
so
didn't know
yeah,
that.
I'd never be able to tell them apart.
Yeah,
They
that
just look
was
like
going to
little
be my
threads to me.
question.
That's all.
Yeah, I
All I
mean,
can
it
see.
looks like spaghetti, and it's
yeah.
like, is this good spaghetti or bad spaghetti? So I don't really know at this point how to advise people who are like, what is this? It's kind of it's freaking me out. And it's like it's either like a horrible, noxious weed or it's a native plant, and I don't know. So that's something we're gonna probably have to deal with more. Because I don't, yeah. So it's really wild looking. Um, but yeah, that's my most exciting thing that I've been dealing with lately. Um, yeah, well, I think we'll probably have to do a whole podcast episode soon about drought and the impact on the Pennsylvania landscape because that's definitely a big issue.
Yeah.
So that's a whole topic in and of itself. But for now, let's welcome on our guest for today. Wendy Leuenberger is a PhD student in the Zipkin Quantitative Ecology Lab at Michigan State University. I believe it was Tim who got in touch with Wendy after a USA Today article came out on a paper that was released that Wendy has been a lead investigator on showing a decline in butterfly populations in the US. And so Tim reached out to Wendy, and we're really excited to talk to her about all things concerning the study and also her work. So, Wendy, welcome onto the podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you so
Thanks for
much for
joining
being
us.
here. Um, so just to start out with kind of a general question, can you kind of describe what your role is as a graduate student right now?
Yeah, so I work with butterfly data, and I'm kind of trying to just see what was going on with the status of butterflies in the United States. And that's like the bulk of what I do with my day is like working on research and working on this project that just came out, and then a couple other projects in order to kind of finish and get the degree. Um, So it's a lot of statistical analyses. I use data gathered by volunteers. So it's an impressive amount of data. We have 90,000 hours of data, which is like the equivalent of somebody's full-time career or like 10 years, 24/7
Whoa.
amount of data. So it's really incredible. And we couldn't do it without the many volunteers who go out and just count butterflies on their own time year after year. And it's got us some really cool findings. Um,
Do you,
we saw, oh,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, yeah, a question would be fine. I'm not quite sure
Do
where you go
you
with it, ideally.
Mhm.
do you have volunteers around the country, or do you have primarily focused on Michigan?
So we use data from 5 different programs. One of them is a nationwide program, the North American Butterfly Association. And then the others, there's a Michigan, Ohio, Iowa, and Illinois all have like state-specific monitoring programs where people go out and they walk a specific transect, usually like 6 weeks, six times over the course of a summer, sometimes more than that. And they just do that repeatedly year after year. And that gets us really good data that's very comparable to be able to track changes over time.
Were they trained to identify species, or are they just kind of doing just the gross kind of like, oh yeah, I see a butterfly and I see another one?
Most of these volunteers are very good. They've been doing it many years. So when people first start, maybe they can only say like, oh, I saw this many butterflies. There were a few like monarchs or cabbage whites. But most of the people have been doing it for many years. They know all of the species that are in their area. And it's really helpful. Like you get better data on butterflies than many insect groups because they're pretty, they're charismatic, and there's quite a few species, but there's not so many species that it's like hard to learn all the ones that are in your area. So one person may only need to learn like 40 or so species in order to be able to do this. And if you're going back year after year, or you're taking pictures of the ones you don't know and talking to the people who have been doing it even longer than you, it gets some really good identification.
Mm.
You know, Wendy, that it's really interesting. You talk about these volunteers, and I use the term citizen scientist, and we've done something very similar here in Penn State, where we had volunteers help us do a study on the bee population in Pennsylvania, and our volunteers were mostly master gardeners, and we trained them up, and they've been doing this now for several years, both trapping and netting, and the amount of data that has been collected could not have been done by a grad student or two, or even paid help. You couldn't do it. So these volunteers, these citizen scientists, are becoming critical, I think, in helping answer and solve some of these problems out there. So your volunteers, were they master gardeners, or were these just folks that were just interested in some of the things going on outside in the environment?
I think it really varies a lot. I mean,
Okay.
I think some of the people who do it, so I'm from Nebraska originally, and that's where my dad lives, and they're just starting having butterfly surveys that cover all the species. The past few years, they've done just like regal fritillaria and monarchs, and now they're expanding to count everything that they see. And so like my dad's a 82-year-old retired math teacher who has some land for like he grew up on, and he's kind of restored prairie on it. He's got a prairie chicken lek, and he goes and he counts butterflies there. So it's people like that. He's a master naturalist in Nebraska, so
Okay.
he does have a
Yep.
little bit of training, but yeah, you don't it's like have to have like a credential to do it. A lot of people are just interested, and you do it a few times, and then you can figure it out and be good to go. And there's most of these, I think all of these programs, either you're paired with somebody at the beginning, or they have like a training session you can go to
Kind of a
and learn
mentor.
how to do the
Yeah.
identification.
So I do want to hear more in general terms about the quantitative ecology lab and like the field you work in general. But since we've kind of done a dive straight into butterfly data, I do want to ask about the study that you were part of recently, and if you could just talk about that's how we learned about you, and if you could just talk about the sort of goals of that study and the major findings, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah, so the study that we did was combining a lot of data. So we're a quantitative ecology lab, and what I really like about statistics and quantitative ecology is it takes all this like really hard-earned field data, and that's really what you have to do in order to be able to tell a story about those data and communicate what you found. And so we're putting together these 5 data sets and looking at multiple species, and that gives us a lot of ability to like figure out trends that you might not be able to do if you only had one data set and you only had like a few species to work with. So we're able to get trends out of the data for some rare species that even like a recent nationwide study that used data throughout the US, we have a few species they weren't able to get just because of kind of the quantitative aspects of it. So that was really cool in terms of like the nerdy quantitative side. And so our main goal was just getting what are the trends for all of the species in the Midwest that we can get. So we have 136 species in the study, which is quite a lot of species to be working with. And we found, insect declines have been in the news a lot. So like we expected to find declines, and we did as expected. So we found quite a few species that were decreasing, a lot that were, decreasing, but not statistically significant decreases. But what really surprised us is that we didn't find a single species that was increasing.
Mm.
And we expected, maybe the cabbage white, that's a non-native species, does really well in agriculture areas. Species like that, we expected to see at least a couple that were doing well. So that was kind of our biggest surprise with the study.
Hmm.
Was there any like exploration or I guess extrapolation as to why the butterflies are declining? Maybe like we all hear habitat loss and pesticides and things like that, but were you only just looking to track population trends, or were you also looking to see causes of decreases or potentially increases?
So the scope of our study specifically, because trends were very hard to get at themselves, we could only directly estimate the trends. But we do know quite a bit about what's driving butterfly declines from other research. And usually you're looking at changes in land use, changes in climate, and changes in agricultural practices, and particularly insecticides and the neonicotinoids, which are usually applied through like a seed coating on corn
Right.
and soybeans and things like that. Um, Given the timescale of land use, most of that land use change in the Midwest happened before our study. And in climate change, you expect to see winners and losers. Some species that like the warmer temperatures or the changes in rain might do better at. So that definitely implicates insecticides and neonicotinoids, as well as tying into some other work that has looked at the effects on butterflies in the Midwest of neonicotinoids. So we definitely want to look more into that, and we suspect that that's definitely part of the problem and part of the declines.
I got a question again. It's sort of like where Margaret was going about with the lab you're working in. Are most of the people, I guess, including like your main advisor, is there a background in entomology, or were you using like the butterfly species because of just um, insects' rapid reproduction? It's like a model, like easier to track because the picture on your website on the thing, you're holding a black bear cub, which is completely different from butterflies. So I was like trying to make the connection there.
Yeah, so we've kind of got a mix. So our lab, my advisor, as well as people who used to be in the lab and have since like gotten other positions, has a history of doing butterfly research. There was a really cool paper that I'm building on for my research. So they modeled the entire like annual cycle of the monarch butterfly and the population trends throughout like as they're migrating and what's going on while they're overwintering in Mexico. And that was a really fundamental project. So like I basically am taking their summer part of the model and expanding it out to multiple species and multiple data sets in the Midwest. So we do have a history of working with entomology. We also have other co-authors on the paper who are very much butterfly specialists. So that was also how we kind of made sure we had that knowledge. The lab itself has a lot of different people. So right now, there's only two of us out of, we have 3 students and 4 postdocs. So only 2 of us work like primarily with insects. And we've got other people who are working with bats and birds. And we've had people doing mammals. So it really varies. And that's kind of the fun part about doing statistics and quantitative ecology is you can kind of jump around to different projects because a lot of the statistical tools are very similar across them. And it's fun to be able to learn different systems and apply to your knowledge and work with different teams.
So with your study, that was mostly done in the Midwest, correct, Wendy?
Mm-hmm.
So is this decline also occurring nationwide or worldwide? Here in Pennsylvania, our landscape is really, really diverse. Whereas I imagine out in the Midwest, I mean, you've just got thousands and thousands of acres of monoculture, 1 or 2 different types of crops. Where here, very mountainous and things are broken up. And I don't think we've done a butterfly study in this neck of the woods, but is this decline being replicated, not replicated, but is it showing, beyond the Midwest?
Yeah, broadly, the answer to that is we're seeing insect declines in most of the places that we look. There's a
Okay.
few cases worldwide where like certain groups aren't declining. But the broad thing is usually around a 2% decline per year is typical, and then there's variation around that. So there's a study in March published in Science that looked at butterflies throughout the United States, and they found a pretty similar average decline as we did. I would say that the Midwest butterfly, the Midwestern United States is kind of a hard place to be a butterfly because how much of the land is agricultural.
Yeah.
So that we do see a little bit of a worse trend in this region compared to some of the others. However, it's also the region of the United States with the best butterfly data. So there's nationwide data, and there's other states that have different data sets as well. But like the Ohio data in particular goes back like the longest out of them, and Illinois goes back really far. So the part of our reason for focusing on that, like for one, it's an important place for looking at butterflies with all the agriculture, but then also just that we have all of this data and the volunteers and the history of data.
And you mentioned that just using some kind of clues without studying specifically the drivers in this study, you can kind of come to the conclusion that insecticides and neonicotinoids in particular are a major culprit. Has there been a change or an increase in the use of those types of insecticides in the span of the study that kind of like uh, mirrors the decline? And do you know, I mean, and this might be outside your realm, but like, do you know why, or like, what explains that trend of like, are people using more insecticides? Are they using them more frequently? Are there fewer regulations? Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, so we think that also might be part of why we saw a steeper decline than some studies, is because we went back, and those where we have no increase in species is because we went back kind of an additional like 10 years compared to some. So our study started in 1992, and neonicotinoids were first introduced, I believe, in like 1994, but they didn't really become super common until around 2003 when the seed coatings came out.
Yep.
And so that was when they started to be used prophylactically rather than just in response to an outbreak. And so now at that point, all of the seeds started being treated regardless of what actual damage was occurring. So it definitely increased in how much they were used across the landscape. And that timing, the fact that it occurred during the course of our study, and we have data starting before it, does seem, very correlated with the trends that we found. And we do have people who are kind of following up and hoping to look at drivers with like additional studies in the future.
Yeah, there's a lot of I know there's a lot of cool research out there about sort of impacting farmer behavior based on like, how do you communicate, that butterflies are important, even if you're like a corn farmer or soybean farmer or something like that, the things that you're putting in the land are having an impact in a greater way. There's a lot of cool research about, how to communicate those pieces of information to create change in the sort of status quo of how farmers are, using these practices. So it'll be an interesting follow-up, maybe. That's like a different, maybe more social science question, but like, yeah, that will be an interesting follow-up to your study maybe in the future. But that is interesting. Are and again, like, I know that the entomology part, you're kind of like a statistician, and looking at broad sets of data. And I want to ask like a pretty basic question about butterflies, but just to sort of like set the stage for this decline. And I mean, we've all, I think, heard about the decline in monarchs, and their migration is getting more difficult because they don't have the food resources, or they're being exposed to more pesticides on their route, or they don't have the habitat. But like, can you talk about the basic requirements for butterflies? Like, what do they need to thrive, and uh, what are they not getting right now, I guess?
Yeah, so what do butterflies need to thrive? So, I mean, ultimately, you're looking at, they need the right temperatures, they need to have the food resources, the climate needs to be correct, and like, the toxic chemical buildup can be a problem as well. I'm not quite sure where to go with this one so much.
Yeah, so similar to
Well,
other insects and other animals, right? Like those basic needs. Tim, do you have any other things to add to
Well, I
that
think
as an
like what
entomologist?
unique, I don't know, it's not necessarily unique, but with, the butterflies, and some other insects, you have an immature stage that's feeding on a specific host or hosts, and then an adult stage that's going and feeding someplace on something different
Yeah,
at a
usually
different time.
going for a nectar
So
source.
yeah, so maybe you do have some flowering plants around that the adults can use, but all the larval like foliage plants have been replaced by like invasive species or something, and it's just
Mm.
not as nutritionally beneficial, and they just start to collapse that way. I think um,
So
it's an intricate web of things that are picking at them and causing them to decline, along with like a lot of other insects. But I reading that your the way I found out about you in the USA Today article, which is a national paper, so it's getting out to more of the general public. And as you said, that like butterflies are pretty and charismatic, which that's a neat term for them. That I'm hoping this catches people's attention who never really think about insects and learning that life on this planet does not function like we need it to, as the insects are collapsing all around us, particularly the pollinators. So I'm hoping that this leads to something somewhere down the line, some changes. But
I think that occurred with the whole bee thing. What was that, 15 years ago? The bee
yeah,
decline started getting
yep.
publicized, and then people just went kind of nuts on, some bee issues and beekeeping and so forth. But when they got there's got to be a positive part of this study. So I'm thinking, was there anything that looked at some of these refuges that are created in the Midwest, where they have these large, prairie-like openings, kind of like, you're talking about your dad? Is there some good stories there where decline doesn't seem to be as bad, or there seems to be more diversity? I mean, are there some good things?
Yeah, so I mean, my study couldn't look at like small little areas like that just with the restrictions, but we absolutely know that like butterfly gardens are helpful. So people restoring habitat, planting native plants that serve as pollinator sources, and planting butterfly gardens, like those are definitely useful things that people can do that make a difference for butterflies.
Yeah, and that's no different than when you encourage people with the pollinators, basically the bees. That's kind of what we've been working with. Is that, that it not only should it be just a homeowner thing going on where you plant some things that the pollinators can visit, but it's almost a community wide. So because these pollinators don't know the boundaries of the yard, or the small community, they fly all over. They're moving, and so it has to be almost a community wide effort for to succeed, I think.
Yeah, and one of the benefits of butterflies is you start building all of that in the community, and they have these, short reproductive times. They lay a whole bunch of eggs, so they really can rebound very quickly. So by making changes with butterfly, like habitat and resources that they need, it can make a difference a lot faster than it could for something like a black bear that's only going to produce like two cubs a year, and take a while before the cubs can produce their own offspring. So you've got some advantages in like the insect resilience in that way.
So
Do
have
we
you
um
go ahead,
oh
Margaret.
well, I was just wondering if either Wendy or like we as a group, do we know anything about the sort of legislative side of neonicotinoid usage? Because I know the EPA has the pollinator, if there's a pesticide that is particularly toxic to pollinators, it will be on the label and there will be specific information for the applicator about when you can apply, if you
Yep.
can apply, like don't apply when there's flowering plants,
Right.
try to apply in the evening, that sort of thing. I mean, I I assume that's the same for the pesticides that are used on corn and maybe some of these seed coats. I don't know. But I assume that if you're using sort of a prophylactic treatment where you're just coating every seed that you're planting, that just kind of throws some of those precautions out the window because then every I'm even wondering, like, are you protecting the seed itself as it's germinating, or does that product get worked up into the entire plant as well as the pollen that it's producing? So they're becoming exposed that way. So I don't know. I guess I just wonder, like, what's the regulation behind the seed coatings, and has there been any movement in the past towards limiting, um, in light of these insect declines, towards limiting the usage of those seed coats?
I think
Yeah,
they're being reviewed right now by EPA or some I read somewhere or some state is doing for like the seed coatings.
New
Um,
York State they're going to be banned for seed coatings, I believe, starting like January 1st, 2030. The EU and Ontario, I believe, have banned seed coatings or greatly reduced their ability to be used. I'm not quite sure on all of the wording. Some states throughout the country, quite a few of them at this point, have put restrictions on when like you could go as a consumer and like buy them off the shelf. So they haven't necessarily banned the seed coatings, but sometimes the usage is that the doses people were using in like ornamental plants were sometimes very high. So it's still a useful regulation to pull some of them off the shelf to not, necessarily be the first line of defense, as well. So there are regulatory um, actions that have been taken, in order to kind of reduce these, given how bad they've been seen. And I think it's still very much a developing process and figuring out what works best.
Mm.
When we talk to some of our other guests, one of the first things we kind of get into is just how you got to where you are. So and we didn't do that today, but have you always had an interest in butterflies, or how did you get to this as a PhD student?
Yeah, I've kind of come back to insects kind of throughout. So I mean, I grew up, my dad hunts fish, all that stuff. So I grew up doing all of that with him. I went to a really cool high school program that was located inside of a zoo. And we had
Oh,
a class that was team taught by one of my teachers and an entomology professor from University of Nebraska Lincoln. And so that kind of got me hooked on entomology a bit as like a high school senior. And then I've worked on birds, I worked on wood rats, but I did my undergrad not far away from you all in IUP, Indiana University of Pennsylvania. And so I had a undergraduate project looking at moths in the pitch pine and scrub oak barrens and how they responded to fire. So we're looking at birds and mammals, but kind of keep coming back to insects. I had birds and insects in my master's, spent a few years in Kentucky working in a forestry and wildlife department. So kind of working on everything, but not really insects for a few years. And then in a quantitative ecology lab that had a lot of really cool butterfly data. So came back over to insects. Um, so yeah,
what a
it's fun to
cool
be
high
able to
school,
jump around.
what a
It
cool
was a
high
really
school
cool high school.
experience.
Yeah, high school in the zoo.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
It was really cool. It was a science focused program and we did a lot of writing as well. So I was very prepared for college when I got there, but then we could take a class where we volunteer with the zookeepers, and during English class, I could, if we had just like open reading, I could take my book and read by the otters. So like that
Oh,
was always fun to be able to do.
that's the best.
that's
Yeah.
It was
awesome.
Oh,
cool.
I'm envious. Yeah. How big of a class? I mean, how big of a graduating class is this? Is this a
About
big?
25 people, so
Yeah.
100 people total for the school, the science focused program in Lincoln
Hmm.
Children's
Wow.
Zoo in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Wow, that's amazing.
So do you in the lab have any like anything else like in the works that's going to be coming out? Kind of a tag along with this research paper here, or have you
So
switched gears and focused on some other
the rest
system?
of my dissertation will focus on this system, just kind of building on what I did. So I have one paper that I'm working on that's taking this first chapter and kind of making it more applied management. So if you're looking to like actually manage habitat, like here's kind of one place to look for the synthesis of what we did and what might work and what you'd want to think about. And also trying to look at like, not just a single species butterfly approach, but like kind of thinking about butterflies as a community as well. So that's one thing that hopefully will come out in the next year or two. The scientific publishing takes a while sometimes. And then I'm also looking into the migratory species and how they're affected by climate. And that one's like, kind of another data intensive one, and trying to piece out like, is precipitation or temperature like affecting them, and how does that affect the trends that we're seeing? So those are what I'm working on. And then got other people looking at, kind of the just butterfly life history and trends, and like kind of the community-wide perspectives and some different things. So yeah, lots of cool things going on in the butterfly world.
So in conjunction with the butterflies and specifically the immature stage, is there anyone looking at um, predators on these and their decline or the impact on birds? Basically, I guess what I'm getting at is that feed on the larval stage, or I guess other insects or other predators out there that are feeding on the larval stage that are apparently in decline.
Yeah, it's thought that it's hard to get very direct studies, but insects and breeding birds are very, very closely connected. So even your like terrestrial birds that don't necessarily eat insects and eat caterpillars as adults, they often feed their young caterpillars because they're just like these bundles of nutrition that you can
Yeah.
just carry around. So that's the fate of many caterpillars in the forests. So yeah, it's definitely thought that like these insect declines are a major factor in the bird declines that we see. Um, Another major predator of caterpillars is bats. So you can also like that's not necessarily the major thing driving bat declines compared to things like white nose syndrome, but it is all connected. So caterpillars are definitely a very key component of food webs.
Yep.
I'd like to ask, I know we talked a little bit about the role of volunteers in this project, and you mentioned a couple of the sort of steps of the monitoring protocol. There's a photo in the article of people with nets, and you said that they're walking a transect and that they're able to identify species. Can you talk a little bit about the training of those volunteers? Like how are they trained? How are the volunteers recruited? Like how long does it take to become a volunteer for a project like this?
Yeah, so I went through the training myself with the North American Butterfly Association, their like Michigan chapter. And so what that looked like was that I joined them for 1 or 2 sessions where they just have kind of like a anyone can join thing at the Kalamazoo Nature Center. So that's kind of where the people who run the program were based. So they had us, walking around. We had butterfly nets. So if we saw a species, we'd try to catch it, and then we could look at it in like a jar and be able to kind of somebody who knew the butterflies really well could point out the distinguishing things that told us it was like metafritillaria versus Aphrodite fritillary, things like that. So lots of training in that regards. There's often an online Zoom session where you can go through like breaking down the different groups of species, like your skippers and your brush-footed butterflies, and trying to kind of get a bit more of a academic look and exposure to every species you might see. There's helpful things in terms of like knowing which species are out at which time of year. So that's something that people use also to get ready. And then just like usually the North American Butterfly Association ones are like kind of a BioBlitz style event. So if there's someone new to butterflies, they're not going to be like thrown into being the only person on their own identifying things. So with those events, it's like, okay, you've got a group of 10 people and you kind of spread out and you're making sure to cover different areas. And if there's something you see that you don't know, you catch it or you call someone over to you who does know. And so we're pretty confident in those data. And then the transects, I haven't personally done a transect survey or gone through that training, and it varies based on the different states, but I think it's fairly similar. They have a Zoom session and you can take pictures, you can catch them and show them to somebody who's experienced and that sort of thing.
So when you catch these, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Tom.
When you catch these, are these becoming specimens in the like your entomological museum up at the university, or is this a catch and release type activity?
Yep, it's a catch and release. So you can catch butterflies and take a look at them, be able to look at the wings, the different sides of the wings, and then let them go, and they'll be all right.
Okay.
So they're pretty resilient in a lot of ways. And that's a good way to, you don't necessarily want to catch them if you already know what they are. But if you've got like a kid with you, it can be pretty cool to see a butterfly up close compared to further away. So it can be also a good outreach tool and things like that.
Yeah, you go to any of like not any of them, but some of our ag fairs, or we have like a entomological day up at the university, up at Penn State, and one of the biggest attractions is the butterfly tent.
Mhm.
And then the young kids get to go in there and just kind of be close up and near butterflies, and it's just, yeah, they love it.
Yeah, another fun thing with catching butterflies is they tag monarchs every year throughout the migratory areas. So like I found out and you catch the monarch butterflies and then you put just like a little sticker on them and let them go. And like they survive that just fine and they keep flying to Mexico and occasionally they actually find one of those butterflies that has a sticker on it and you can see where, this butterfly that was in Michigan went to this part of Mexico. And it's
That's pretty
really
cool.
cool data.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
The comment I wanted to make was, and you touched upon it earlier in another part of the conversation. The focus of our podcast has mostly been on like ornamental plants, and I think this drives home your point, and Tom also raised it with just other pollinators, is the importance of gardening with native plant material. And I also think learning how to tolerate some defoliation, from caterpillar feeding. I mean, most people, and I'm making assumptions which are never good, they don't like to have insects on their property feeding on their plants, but a lot of times, our native caterpillars, the plants can tolerate the feeding and it's not going to impact the overall health of the plant. So there are easy steps that people can make to build their own little oasis um, in a neighborhood to help benefit wherever their local population of butterflies are.
Yeah. I think also having a good we're sort of so lucky, at least in this part of Pennsylvania and maybe in others, but we have some very, very good sources of native plants from nurseries that are grown with a lot of care. And I think that's another part of sort of the chain of events is like purchasing plants from a source that you're not really sure about, they may be pre-treating with insecticides and pesticides before the plant gets to you. And so knowing something about the source of the plant and how it was grown and what it was treated with, and before you plant it in your yard is also because even some native plant nurseries they will use pesticides, and I think that's something to be aware of too. Yeah. Um, Great. Well, we've covered a lot with butterflies. And at maybe another time we'll have to hear the story. Well, actually, if you want to share it now, what is the story of that black bear cub that you're holding in, in
Yeah,
your
I want
photo?
to know.
Yeah, so that was part of my work at the University of Kentucky. So I did that between
Okay.
my master's and my PhD, and they had some tagged, they had some mama bears with like radio tags in them, and so we took a bunch of students out over like sometime around spring break, and they started the mom, so she was under anesthesia, and then they took out the cubs from the den and like pit tagged them. So they put a little microchip in, like you put in a cat or a dog. That way they'll be able to track that bear if they encounter it again and take a bunch of like vital signs, weight, things like that. And, then we pass around the bear cub because they're pretty darn cute.
Whoa, it
That
does
would have
look
been
so
so much
cute.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone gets a good profile photo.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, it's been really fun talking with you, Wendy, and thank you so much for sharing about your study and about some of the interesting parts of what you do. And yeah, we'll have to check back in with you in terms of like, what's okay, we have the study, we know butterflies are declining. Now what? And I'm sure at a certain point that will trickle down to the work that we do with the ornamental landscape. But yeah, it's really interesting to learn about all this. So thank you so much for coming on the show. And we end our episodes the same way, where we always ask our guests what they like to do when they're not working. So when you're not holding bear cubs and crunching the numbers, what do you like to do?
Usually I'm either hiking or biking. So it's generally still outside, just a little bit less number crunching involved.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds really, really
Good
nice.
stress reliever.
Yep.
That's exactly what most of us do. Yep.
Yeah, well, enjoy that. Enjoy your holiday weekend coming up. And we'll have to talk to you another time to see how you're doing after you're done with your PhD, maybe. So thanks, Wendy. It's really great to meet you.
Thank you.
That's good. Thank you.
All right, take care.